Welcome back. So we've got a great panel this afternoon on the rise of virtual currencies. I'm your moderator for this session, which is going to be an hour long. We're going to leave some time for questions at the end. I'm Christina Farr. I write for VentureBeat, primarily cover healthcare, but maybe after today's session, I'm going to be exclusively looking at Bitcoin. So we've got a great group of panelists with us today, and just to kind of briefly introduce them, Greg Kidd, sitting directly to my left from Ripple Labs, William Quigley, who's at the end, from Clearstone Venture Partners, which is almost exclusively investing in alternative currencies, and Adam Draper of Boost VC. So let's kick things off by just kind of asking some very basic questions. Why do we, when we're hearing about this whole space, and the panel is virtual currencies, people seem to just talk about Bitcoin as if it's somehow synonymous with the term virtual currencies. Why is that, and what else is out there?
I'm happy to start. So Bitcoin, of course, is the currency, the new currency that has the highest market cap, some maybe 11 billion today, if you add up all the coins times the dollar price. But there are dozens and dozens of alt currencies, soon to be thousands of alt currencies. And they'll all do different things. Some of them will fight for dominance. That'll maybe be the top 10, but there'll be thousands of currencies that people will use ultimately. And the term alt or alternative currencies is the thing to put all of them under one bucket. And Bitcoin, of course, has some phenomenal advantages, and it's the reason it's the best of the bunch, let's say, for today, and we can talk later about why that might be the case.
So one of the reasons that I personally feel that it's sort of Bitcoin and then everything else right now is that I don't know if how many people have invested in Bitcoin in this room?
Whoa.
Wow. 6 months ago,
you guys are on it.
6 months ago, that would have been 0 in this room. But the is really everyone sort of has a story when they start investing in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin has the most passionate sort of following, most passionate community. I know when I first invested in Coinbase, it was sort of like everyone welcomed me with open arms, and I don't know. I feel that that's one of the reasons that sort of Bitcoin ended up taking off. It was this hugely passionate hacker base that really took storm, and now it's 10x any other digital currency, and number 2 is Litecoin right now.
And are these currencies? You mentioned Litecoin is number 2. Are they all competing with each other, or is it somehow complementary?
I would say at this point it would be really hard to say any coin is competing. We're talking about $600 trillion a year in currency and forex trading, and Bitcoin has $10 billion in market cap. So it would be really hard to say anyone's competing right now. Having said that, there are coins that are trying to be elevated in people's perspectives, and each coin has typically 1 or 2 unique aspects to it that make it useful for a particular activity. But Bitcoin overall has something that none of these do, and that is the blockchain. And we can talk later about the value of the blockchain. But I personally think Bitcoin is a sideshow. The thing that is revolutionary here is the blockchain. And that is what is going to change commerce, financial transactions, the way people exchange money and other things for forever.
So I'll give a little bit of a different perspective. I was an original investor in pure Bitcoin companies, starting with Coinbase, and I love the blockchain, but from a payments background point of view, I come from the Fed, from the payments group. Bitcoin has been a little bit troubled in terms of serving as a high volume payment protocol, and so part of my association now with Ripple, which works with Bitcoin, is to try to find a version of a virtual currency that can do clearing and settlement in real time, whereas the Bitcoin blockchain takes quite a bit of time to clear. So one of the things I'm searching for in terms of investments and involvement is virtual currencies that serve not just as a great store of value and something that solves the double spend problem, which Bitcoin has obviously done and knocked it out of the park on, but I'm beginning to look at what might actually be a solution that actually works as a backbone for a global payment system as well as just being a store of value.
So we're going to come back to this idea of a blockchain, but just another kind of basic question. Where did Bitcoin come from?
Satoshi Nakamoto.
It wasn't me.
That's it. No. No one really knows. It's an anonymous creator whose pseudonym is Satoshi Nakamoto. We were just discussing in the room before this that it's probably not a Japanese person because the name is Japanese and they're trying to mislead you. But its origin is really unknown. I mean, it's really like, what's amazing about it is it was built by the community. So it was really built by that passionate community that I was talking about before. It's a great peer-to-peer currency system. So, yeah.
Maybe it actually is a Japanese creator and they want you to think that it isn't.
Double blind? No!
So you're, speaking about Japan, you're going next week on a trip, and it sounds like this whole trend, this movement has spread so far beyond kind of Silicon Valley and the US. What are you kind of hoping to find in Japan, and can we talk a little bit about international markets in general?
Yeah, I think, well, a lot of people attribute the huge run-up of Bitcoin in the last, by the way, like a month and a half ago, Bitcoin was like $100 per Bitcoin, and now it's 900 or something. I don't know what it is. Does anyone know what it is today?
877.
877. Are you looking at it in front of you right now? Okay, 877.
Buying Bitcoin right now.
Everyone's attributing that to China, which is probably very true. I think it was more that the press got hold of the fact that China was accepting Bitcoin, that Baidu was like a subsidiary of Baidu was actually accepting the currency, and then everyone thought that Baidu was accepting the currency, and then everyone just was like, hey, China, yeah, that's 1 billion people, and now they're all using Bitcoin, and then it went bonkers. But really, actually, in the recent weeks, I've been seeing, God, I was just on a call today, huge hedge funds are putting money into Bitcoin. I've heard about big funds that are buying 1,000 coins a week. I've heard about venture firms. I've heard about individuals at venture firms. The run-up was really attributed to, well, it is the press, but it's also the fact that there's becoming more and more faith in it. In Japan, I mean, I would like to meet the Mt. Gox guys. I don't know if I'm going to, but that's about all I'm trying to find out there.
So I also attribute the run-up to the successful week of Senate hearings and Ben Bernanke not shooting it down. So simply that we got through the week of the Senate hearings plus the Baidu announcement has been an incredible run-up. Oddly enough, in Japan, Mt. Gox, which was set up by Jeb McCleb, who was also the co-founder of Ripple, there's not actually that much volume. It really is, it's the Chinese volume that's really, even on the Ripple network, the Chinese volume is first in terms of the Chinese currency, and Bitcoin well ahead of the Ripple currency.
Okay. Yeah.
So Ben Bernanke, I was reading a little bit about that before our panel. A lot of kind of traditional sort of finance types are saying that Bitcoin needs to stabilize. It's just incredibly volatile right now, and it's just going up and down. Just watching it is infinitely fascinating. Do you agree with that? Do you think it does need to stabilize, and if so, how?
I'll take a stab at it. So no, I don't think it needs to stabilize. In fact, I think that would be the death of it. The global economy is $80 trillion, and 10 or 12 billion dollars of currency is totally irrelevant. It'll accomplish nothing. What would it need to be? That's maybe an imponderable, but I would argue it probably needs to be 500 billion to $1 trillion. At that amount, it becomes very useful for a lot of things. So it needs to, in my estimation, go up about 100-fold from where it is today to start really having an impact. And there's all kinds of side businesses that it's perfectly fine to do today, but it's just not enough, in my judgment, to make it that interesting. It has to go up.
So as far as stabilization, I mean, I agree for the most part, but in the long term, I do think it needs to stabilize in order to be used as a currency consistently. So one of the reasons I'm a little biased, so what Boost does, we're an accelerator and we have a focus on Bitcoin companies. So we've launched about 10 Bitcoin companies over the last year. Actually just the last 6 months or something. 1 or 2 of them are here somewhere. And originally with Bitcoin, it was really, really valuable to be a miner. So mining actually was very profitable. Right now, it's not as profitable. It's way more valuable just to invest in the currency. It's speculative, obviously. It's still you will do really, really, really well, or you will do really, really, really poorly. But in the future, when it does stabilize, I believe that the most valuable part of the Bitcoin economy is going to be the ecosystem that's built around it, which is why Boost is really excited about launching these companies over the next 3 years. We're actually going to be, well, infinite years, but over the next 3 years, we're going to be trying to launch 100 Bitcoin companies, so pretty cool. Or digital currency companies, I should say. I use those two interchangeably sometimes. My bad.
So you're investing in 100 Bitcoin or digital currency companies. What kinds of companies are you looking for? Is it literally just sort of new types of exchanges, or are you looking at new currencies, or even companies that are trying to get into new markets and sectors?
Okay, so we actually found a lot of opportunities in general. Early on, still actually, it's probably it'd be good to invest in an exchange. We launched 2 exchanges in our last batch. But there are really a couple huge opportunities. One is remittances. Cross-border transactions is a huge opportunity for Bitcoin, the Bitcoin protocol in general. And so we're looking towards seeing what's going to take down Western Union. That's sort of a big thing. That's a $450 billion a year market. Then microtransactions. I actually think Bitcoin and other digital currencies are going to be it's going to make consuming content different on the internet. You will be able to pay 5 cents for an article rather than a $30 a month subscription fee. And then also just inflationary currencies are a huge opportunity. We have a company that's a payments processor in Argentina that actually you pay with a credit card and it pays out in Bitcoin. It's cool. It's called Bitpagos. Check it out. So there's a lot of other ones. Those are the main ones that we've been looking at.
And William, you know, we were talking about your background. You started with a tiny little fund in 2010, and now you're one of the largest investors in Bitcoin and almost 99% dedicated. Why did you decide to go sort of full throttle into Bitcoin and all these alternative currencies?
Yeah, that was actually very simple. Me and my partners started the first consumer internet fund in 1995, and we made a lot of money. There was a lot of internet infrastructure to build. Pretty much you couldn't go wrong with whatever sector you pointed at. And I've waited a long time for the same type of phenomenon to hit. I thought that the alt currency space, it felt like what I experienced at the dawn of the dot-com era. And there were almost infinite numbers of ways to invest in this area. It was very capital efficient. Lots and lots, something of what Adam talked about earlier, lots of passionate people, which was what we saw at the dawn of the internet age. Really dedicated, passionate people, super smart people. Interestingly enough, having nothing to do basically with Silicon Valley. You know, almost all of the innovation we saw early on was not in the Valley. And now Silicon Valley has come into it, and I think that's a great thing. What the Valley does very, very well is it makes it easy to use and consume technologies. It is not easy to use today. I'd say even today for the average person, you know, just getting a wallet and understanding is the wallet secure and all that stuff, it is a pain. So we have a long way to go.
And what happened back in 2010 when you first started investing? It wasn't kind of all roses and millions of dollars in the bank.
Well, the nice thing was it took almost nothing to start these companies, right? It's all pretty much open source. So we just started looking at the ecosystem and basically divided the ecosystem to 8 parts and decided we would have investments in each of those particular sectors. And now I think it's even bigger than what we imagined it was going to be back a few years ago.
Were there any kind of lessons learned from that first round versus now?
Well, what Adam talked about is certainly there's a lot of really smart people out there, and the mining, in my judgment, it was going to maybe take 10 years before people got really sophisticated, and it took about 10 months, and mining became incredibly challenging. You can make money in mining, but it's incredibly challenging. And in fact, it is, I think, one of the core weaknesses right now of the Bitcoin ecosystem is the fact that the mining is being concentrated among very few people at this point. And I think that's one area I am worried about.
So I look at it as a 1.0 and 2.0 reality. The 1.0 reality has been this amazing area where speculators are having a field day with the currency. It is digital gold, but if that's a great opportunity, a 10x opportunity from where we sit is to move into the payment space, because like right now nobody can whip out a debit card and go and buy a loaf of bread with your Bitcoin or XRP. But I believe within the next 6 months that's going to be possible. And so when digital currency enters the mainstream, as opposed to being sort of an esoteric trading opportunity, then we really are in a situation where legacy financial payment rails haven't had a real competitor in 40 years. The concept that basic functions of buying and selling goods, not just on the internet, but at the corner shop, could be done in digital currencies instantly at a lower cost and simpler is a real race. It's the first real race we've had in financial services in my lifetime.
Yeah, I'd make one comment, by the way. There was massive amount of wealth created in the first and second internet waves, maybe $5 trillion globally. But it's fascinating that not a single great financial institution was created during that era, none. And probably never will be, for a whole bunch of reasons, but mostly just due to the nature of banking and people's relationship to money. As a result, another area I would say is both an opportunity and a risk for people investing in Bitcoin companies as opposed to Bitcoin, is the financial institutions, I think, are going to become very savvy a lot quicker than, let's say, the retailers did about e-tail or e-commerce. And that means if you are a company, a startup in this space, time is not your friend, and you have to figure out where the big financial institutions are not going to play. Because at the end of the day, people will always prefer to work with a recognized, trusted financial institution than a startup.
And one of the comments that I thought was very canny that you made earlier was just that what we need in order for these new virtual currencies to succeed is for consumers to adopt them en masse. Otherwise, regulators are just going to kind of come in and regulate them out of existence.
Yeah, I feel very strongly about that. The reason there's something called an internet is because consumers decided to use it before Washington got a hold of it. Had Washington had its way, there probably would be no internet, or a very, very poor internet. With Bitcoin, there's a lot of speculators, but not as many people actually using it. And if 20% of the US population started using Bitcoin, if merchants started to embrace it, many are, but if they embraced it at a quicker pace, and we could see how phenomenal this is, how much better it is than accepting other forms of payment, I think we would be in good shape. But if the adoption is slow, and I'm talking specifically about the US, it could be very bad for Bitcoin and all the alt currencies.
So start using your Bitcoins.
So I was looking back at my Bitcoin coverage this morning, and I think I had said a year ago, around today, a year ago, that it was a niche for libertarians, hipsters, and criminals. And we saw how many people raised their hands in the room, and I think it's gone far beyond that, and I was admittedly wrong there. So who are the new kind of markets that are coming into this that are not just those niche groups pinpointed last year?
I think it's fascinating that Bank of America just released a 20-page document describing Bitcoin to a lot of people. I thought that was a huge step in the direction of, well, either they're afraid of it or they're excited about it. One way or the other, they're educating their people. No, like I said before, I've been hearing about a lot of people just getting ready to play in the space with their money. I think that there's a lot of speculative money going into Bitcoin, whether it be smart or very, very speculative, like high school kids. It's a very, I'd say it has moved on from just hipsters and tech geeks.
Yeah, it's definitely moved on. But again, the velocity of money, which is the figure we should all be thinking about, the velocity is not enough just yet. And of course, I think it's pretty obvious why. One reason anyway, based on how fast the prices have been going up. That cup of coffee you bought might have really cost you $300, right? If you look back a month. So to that extent, it's harder to get people to actually use it. But it does have a lot of great advantages, and I think this is why once merchants understand it, they would much prefer to take all of their transactions in Bitcoin versus anything else, with the exception of maybe actual cash payments.
Yeah, to exemplify the sort of volatility he's talking about, during my last accelerator program where we had 7 Bitcoin companies, there was a candy dish where this guy was selling candy for Bitcoin. And it's 0.01 Bitcoin, so at the time that was $1. And so there was there's one guy who paid for $100 worth of candy throughout the program, and now that is worth about $1,000. So he paid $1,000 for candy throughout the 3-month program that we put him through. So it's sort of like people are worried that that's going to happen to them, and it is happening to them. But still. That was probably a large percentage of the transactions that day.
So what are their advantages for merchants? Like, how do you, when you're pitching your Lyft driver on why, or your taxi driver on why Bitcoin is so awesome, what are the reasons that you tell them? What's the pitch?
Well, and again, so I come from the Square DNA where it's 275 basis points, and that's sort of the starting range of getting in. And so merchants are looking at that to something higher, and that's just right off the top. And so the digital currencies have the potential to be basically interchange free. And so it's a huge economic advantage, and they also have the potential to settle immediately or almost immediately. So those are 2 game changers.
And I think if you're an e-commerce company, there are vast expanses of the globe that you've redlined, right? You probably won't take transactions from Russia. You may or may not want to take transactions from China. All kinds of other countries you probably don't want to take transactions from because they're fraudulent. The beauty of Bitcoin is there's no chargebacks. So without a chargeback, without fraud, it opens up a whole new market for a lot of e-commerce companies. They don't have to worry about that. Online gaming, so lots of fraud in online gaming. You don't have to worry about that. You're always guaranteed when you take a Bitcoin that you own it, that you've got it. Those are the sorts of things that I think are going to be allowing the e-commerce marketplace to expand. And that's one of the built-in values of something like Bitcoin. And what I think as merchants understand it more, while they'll say, that's great, and I don't have to pay fees, or if I have to pay fees, they'll be roughly what I'd pay anyway to American Express.
Yeah, I mean, taxi drivers specifically, I was talking about earlier, I love talking to taxi drivers and trying to pitch them on Bitcoin. And so I mean, first off, I hate when taxi drivers are like, they have like the Visa and American Express sign on their cab, and then they say, no, we only accept cash. And so they are very sensitive to that 2% and 2.3% and 30 cents per transaction. But they are also very sensitive to sending money across borders. There are a lot of international cab drivers out there. And so when I start to talk to them about being able to send money, remittances, sending money across borders, they get really, really excited because they all unanimously hate Western Union. To them, the Western Union takes 10 to 20% of their money, and they're like, it evaporates into thin air, the value of it. So I would say, like, for merchants specifically, those were the two things that we were excited about.
Cool. So let's sort of move on to the question of investment, how to make money out of Bitcoin.
Invest a year ago.
Well, if you weren't canny or smart enough to invest a year ago, is it too late to buy Bitcoin now? Have we all missed the boat?
Well, you never want to tell people to invest in something as risky as this. I will tell you, I certainly am continuing to invest in Bitcoin and alt currencies, and I'm investing in the companies that are benefited by that. It is an interesting question whether you invest into the alt currency or you invest in the ecosystem of companies. And to date, you would have been better off just investing in the currencies, but you couldn't have known that. And of course, the currencies will ultimately need these ecosystem of companies. So what we've done is we've taken a balanced approach. We invest in the currencies, but probably the majority of the money is in companies themselves.
Where did everyone buy their Bitcoins from? Friends, Coinbase, Bitstamp. No, that's just really interesting to take. Mount Gox. Oh, wow. Over the last month, you're pretty happy.
So you get paid in Bitcoins from a company in the market, in the Bitcoin market, yeah.
So I don't think any of us are going to like suggest you invest in Bitcoin because it is crazy speculative and crazy risky. However, we can all probably say that we're all investing in some form of digital currency and continuing to. I think the reason I got excited about it, it's probably the biggest peer-to-peer revolution since like Napster for me in my lifetime. So, or the internet is what William was talking about. And so I got excited about being a part of it. And so we jumped on the excitement train about a year ago. So I mean, how to make money in it, right now, there's still, if, let's say hypothetically Bitcoin takes over the world's economy, so that's $600 trillion, we're at a very small percentage of that right now, so it still has upside, if you will. But we're at Boost, we're getting excited about the companies, the ecosystem. So I would say start a company, personally.
Though I will say this, where do you base that company, right? Most of our companies are not based in the U.S. And I'd like them to be based in the U.S., but the regulatory framework is almost impossible to understand. And for instance, this is one area where, really surprisingly, Europe is far ahead of the United States when it comes to alt currency, understanding alt currencies. Even people who have never heard the phrase, it's far more intuitive. And the reason is because they formed a union, an economic union, 25 years ago. And they're very comfortable with the idea of giving up their sovereign rights with the ability to have a currency that is exchangeable anywhere. And the bankers I interact with in Europe, I see as being just much more savvy. Now, just about all countries, even now, have not affirmatively said they love Bitcoin. Some have said, like Germany and Canada, we're not going to prosecute you if you hold Bitcoins, or we're not going to prosecute you if you decide to exchange Bitcoins. But in the US, We have 50 nations. There are 50 states, and each state has its own regulation around money and money transfer. By the way, what is the definition of money? What is the definition of a commodity? What is the definition of a security? These are all questions that you have to ponder when you start to look at the regulation in the US for all currencies. And I'm not sure when it's going to get all sorted out. You got federal and you got state issues. There's 3 states in the US that don't have money transfer license requirements. That's where most of the Bitcoin companies are basing themselves. And there's a few states that have money transfer licenses but have said Bitcoin or the all currencies don't have to comply with those. But it's a nebulous zone. And you won't get any lawyer to tell you, here is the black and white roadmap. Everyone is operating with a certain amount of gray in the US.
Yeah, right. Hello. Yes. Right now, actually, in the U.S., the hardest thing for a Bitcoin company to do is get a bank account. It's like we launched 10 companies. They're all in some form of a gray area as far as their bank account is concerned. A couple of them have backup bank accounts because just in case a bank shuts down one of their bank accounts. And it's like a really serious problem because banks are really worried that the U.S. government is going to say that Bitcoin's not allowed or put some weird regulation or say that it's that there's just no hard black or white rules around Bitcoin. And so basically all banks are really scared of everything. So they're just like, nah, we're not going to deal with your Bitcoin nonsense. Even though B of A is releasing all these white papers on different Bitcoin digital currency stuff. And so if anyone has any ideas, I even considered starting like a Bitcoin bank, but it turns out that's dealing with a whole nother set of issues. But starting a Bitcoin company right now is very difficult if you're going to be a payments processor, if you're going to be an exchange, if you're going to be transacting value. So that's another thing you can think about, or solve that problem. That would be great. That's an opportunity. Go do that.
So I think I might have to throw out another potentially unsolvable problem at this point, and that's security. And you type in Bitcoin on Google, and probably the second thing that comes up is hackers. So where do you sort of come down on that issue?
Well, yeah, and that's one of those things that is so confusing to the general public if they dabble and look into Bitcoin. On the one hand, the blockchain is the safest, most impenetrable digital network ever created by man. Unbreakable. On the other hand, every day you read about people having a Bitcoin stolen, and so those questions are constantly getting thrown at the Bitcoin community. You say this is safe, but every day people get things stolen, and that, of course, is because when you take those Bitcoins out of the blockchain, it's the equivalent of taking money out of a bank. It's safe in the bank, pretty much, behind a vault. When you have it in your wallet, it's not safe. And the hackers figured this out really quickly. And I think this is a very bad thing for the Bitcoin ecosystem, that these wallets are terribly designed, right? And I think Coinbase has a very good wallet, one of the best out there. But there's, it's open source software. There's hundreds of wallets, and people are downloading these wallets and thinking their coins are safe. And hackers have realized, wow, there's $100,000 sitting on some guy's computer, and I can get it in 15 minutes. And my own view is that the Bitcoin community has to come up with a set of standards around which the wallets will be secured. It's a stamp of approval or something. And if you don't have that, then you don't want to use that wallet. But unfortunately, we're going to hear a lot more about people getting things stolen. And this is where the government might come in and say, hey, there's millions of dollars of people's property getting stolen unbeknownst to them. This is not safe. Let's regulate it.
Do you think there's a huge opportunity here for a safer kind of wallet?
Yeah, absolutely.
So one architectural design is people talk about the wallet, but if you think in your real life about how you have the wallet that you have in your pocket, and then you have your money that's in the vault, it probably isn't a bad designed for digital currencies too, to basically think of the value that you have stored in two places. The wallet, what we often call a hot wallet, really easy to get to, and you use sums in that basically for day-to-day usage, and if it gets compromised, you might lose $500, but you'd rather have something super convenient. The vault might be something that requires like multiple forms of authentication, multiple signatures, is really tucked deep away, what we call a cold storage or cold vault. And when people become a little bit more sophisticated, you'll get those two different mechanisms just like they exist in the real world today.
So where should people, if in the audience people have got Bitcoins, where should they store them?
Oh, well, what Greg just said, it should be cold storage, right? My rule of thumb keeps changing. It used to be 1,000 Bitcoins I would keep in a wallet, right? Well, I wouldn't do that anymore. Now it wouldn't be more than 10 coins I would ever keep in a wallet, or I'd recommend somebody keep in a wallet. Otherwise, you have to just start adopting cold storage policies. It's you would not keep $100,000 sitting in your briefcase. Your PC is about the least secure thing on earth. So if there's one thing you take away from this panel, it's don't store coins in a wallet. Maybe 5 or 6, but no more than that, no more than 10. Otherwise, cold storage.